After Japanese carriers that complied with naval treaties tried to exploit loopholes in naval treaties and latterly tried to fit inside what was left of the allowed displacement in the naval treaties, the next class of Japanese carriers would be designed once Japan had publicly torn up the treaty limits and decided they were going to build carriers along the lines of what they'd wanted all along. As the mid to late 1930s Japanese planners had already realised they couldn't outbuild the US Navy, its most likely opponent on the world stage, or the Royal Navy, the second most likely enemy, they decided instead to go for quality over quantity. Elsewhere, this would be seen in the development of the Yamato-class battleships, but for carriers, this would result in the Shokaku class. Having now converted to and purpose-built for carriers, the plan was to combine the best elements of all the previous ships with, hopefully, none of the weaknesses. This meant taking the air group of the Akagi, the speed of Hiryu and Soryu, and the heavy anti-aircraft battery that was being fitted to Kaga during its reconstruction. Unsurprisingly, this required a rather large ship, and the two vessels of the class, Shokaku and Zuikaku, would be the heaviest purpose-built aircraft carriers in the world until the arrival of the Essex class. At just under 30,000 tons standard displacement and topping out at just over 32,000 tons at full load. Originally, the bridge was intended to be placed on the port side about halfway down the length of the ship, the reasoning being that this minimised turbulence and maximised space for takeoff, which took place on the forward half of the ship, and it would counterbalance the weight of the funnels, which were placed on the starboard side. However, whilst the ships were under construction, tests aboard Akagi and Hiryu showed that that wasn't such a good idea after all, and the design was changed to have the island on the starboard side and further forward, in a more conventional position. As Shokaku was further along in construction than her sister, the internal supports for the port side bridge were already in place, and it would have taken too much time and money to rebuild that section of the ship. So new supports were simply added to the starboard side, and the flight deck was extended about 3 foot to port to counterbalance the new weight, with a fractional reduction to the starboard side flight deck. The sum of the whole process would leave the ships very fractionally different in appearance, but as it so happens, so few clear photos of the ships from above survived that difference is only really a concern if you're making a model of the ship. Propulsion was provided by 160,000 shaft horsepower driving 4 shafts, giving a top speed of just over 34 knots, with armament consisting of 16 dual-purpose 5-inch guns in 8 twin mounts, 2 per side forward and 2 per side aft, plus a dozen triple 25mm mounts arranged evenly along either side, although during World War II this would be increased several times on both ships, and include the installation of anti-aircraft rocket launchers and the first radar to be installed on a Japanese carrier. Armour was overall minimal, basically splinter and destroyer shell-proof for much of the ship's length, except for the magazines and the aviation fuel storage areas where up to 6.5 inches of belt armour and 5.2 inches of deck armour could be found. The ship's machinery also had a 2.6-inch layer of deck armour, but there was no armour of any significance in either the flight or hangar decks. Torpedo protection was, however, quite comprehensively present along the length of the ship, although it didn't quite meet the ambitious target of resistance to a 1,000-pound warhead. Aircraft were to be carried in 2 hangars supplied by 3 lifts, and there were supposed to be 96 of them. But the arrival of newer, larger aircraft cut this capacity down to 84, of which 12 would be stored as spares, for a fighting value of 72, consisting of 18 fighters and 27 each of dive and torpedo bombers, although again during the war this would change, with more fighters being added at the expense of strike aircraft, at least while the Japanese Navy still had the aircraft to fill the carriers completely. The 2 carriers were laid down in late 1937 and spring 1938 respectively, launched in 1939 and commissioned in late summer 1941, just in time to begin training for their role in the attack on Pearl Harbor, followed by the invasion of Rabaul and the Indian Ocean Raid, operating together, as Japanese doctrine intended, as the 5th Carrier Division. However, at the Battle of the Coral Sea, Shokaku was damaged by multiple bomb hits and Zuikaku lost a good chunk of her air group. Combining the survivors of both air wings onto Zuikaku went against Japanese doctrine, and so both ships would miss midway, even though there was nothing mechanically wrong with Zuikaku. Instead, they would both fight together again at the battles of the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz Islands, by the end of which Shokaku was once again heavily damaged and both ships' air wings were badly reduced. Zuikaku would be used to support the Guadalcanal evacuation with fighter cover until her sister was repaired, but their operational careers together would end in June 1944 at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, where first the new carrier Taiho was sunk by USS Albacore, and then Shokaku was hit by multiple torpedoes from USS Kavala, sinking later that day following continued fires and explosions. Zuikaku took a single bomb hit as the fleet retreated, and she would be patched up in time to sail as part of the decoy Northern Group in October 1944 in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Expending most of her understrength air wing in a distraction strike, she would later be struck in return by overwhelming American carrier attacks, which, after 7 bomb and 7 torpedo hits, left her to slip beneath the waves, taking about half her 1,700-man complement with her.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.